Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I think as I listen to the discussion, everyone here is elected from someplace. Some from the Central Valley, some from San Diego, some from Orange County. I remind people that on a per capita basis, I bet I have more people in the California institution than anybody here. The Crips started at my high school in South Central Los Angeles, and the Bloods originated in my current hometown in Inglewood. And if you go south in my district in San Pedro, it's run by MS-13, and if you move a little west, the Mexican Mafia sells dope. Having grown up as I did in South Central and looking at crime as I have, I've been shot at several times. In fact, I remember a discussion we were having in South LA one time, and we were having a discussion about Tookie Williams, who was recently executed. And there were people who were saying, oh, we should let Tookie out. And I'm like, not me. Tookie tried to kill me twice, so I don't quite have the same kind of reverence that you have for him. But that being said, I rise to support the bill, again, because I recognize a number of things that you may not. The crime rate didn't go down because you were able to enact 3 strikes, at least not in South Central where I come from, which is where much of the crime that you discuss originates. We were able in South Central Los Angeles to stem the development of crack cocaine. When we reduced the sale of crack cocaine in South Los Angeles, that caused the murder reduction. And the way that we did it was we made it less cool. By simply reducing that reduced the murder rate in Watts with the Watts Gang Task Force, of which I'm a member, by almost 40% in 2 years. Simply because you took what was the driving force that was making that work. But in California, we have high prison costs, which has already been mentioned. We're also one of the few states that incorporates people over 65 years of age. If you go to Folsom right now, I can show you a blind, amputee man. Who are we protecting him from? He's blind and he's got one leg, but he's sitting in the joint. He doesn't cost $50,000 a year. He costs $300,000 a year. That's why the average cost goes up, Mr. Hartman, because we've got a number of infirmed people. We've got guys that had strokes sitting in the joint. It cost almost $400,000 to have a doctor go visit a stroke victim in the joint, but we've got him sitting in there. And so we measured the cost of health care by the average, and you've got all these guys who have no business in there. It would be cheaper to put him in a nursing home and let Medicare pay the cost of keeping him, but yet we let him sit in the joint. We could save a whole lot of money, to your point, by simply getting rid of the people who pose absolutely no risk. But we keep them in the joint. We were discussing 20,000 or 30,000 or 40,000. Let me remind you that in my district, again, I see people who were in the joint for 6 months, and then they get out. They were in, and then they get out. Well, what happens? See, I gotta remind some of you, if you're a Crip or a Blood, going to jail is not a real deterrent for you. In fact, sometimes you like jail better. I can take you to guys who need to go to the dentist who can't afford it. So they violate their parole so they can go back to the joint, because getting a dentist in the joint is cheaper than it is to try to be on the street. In Inglewood last week, an agency set up a voluntary program where 1,500 people a day could see a doctor for free. I had people stand in line overnight and took up all the slots. Many of them were prison inmates, just trying to get medical care that they couldn't afford. And some of the people who were in that line said to me, you know what? I'm just going to skip my probation so I can go back to the joint, because it's easier to do that than it is for me to stand in line for 2 days at the forum so that I can see a dentist to get a root canal. So here we are looking at what we're going to do. We're one of the few states, by the way, that actually paroles every inmate that we let out. Most states figured out a long time ago that that was actually a quite dumb thing to do, because at any given point we have between 40 and 60,000 inmates who get their parole violated. So let me tell you what happens to that guy. We violate his parole, we take him to Chino, we take him to the dentist, and we give him a physical. And by the time we complete all of that, it's time to let him out again. He comes back home. And when you see him on the street, you go, yo, Joe, didn't I just see you a couple of months ago? He said, yeah, I went back to Chino, and then they shipped me off to another joint, then they let me back out because it was a parole revocation. They could only keep me for 3 or 4 months anyway. So you've got 50 or 60,000 cats who come in and out anyway. They receive no service, but they still jack up the cost of providing the care. We're also one of the few states that incarcerates women for nonviolent offenses. I got women who were simply turning tricks on Figueroa. And so now you put her in jail because she had 2 rocks in a purse, and now you've got to pay to hold on to her child or 2 children that she has. The cost of that goes back to corrections, so you incorporate a woman essentially because she's poor. Because 5 years ago we cut off her little welfare check, it would have been cheaper to let her keep the check and let her keep the children with her. So now we put the kids in foster care, we put her in the joint because she was turning tricks on Figueroa. And we celebrate that as protecting the public. No, it isn't. If we're going to be fair about what we're trying to do, I fully agree that if somebody commits murder, I, for example, didn't have a problem with Tookie being executed. There were discussions that he didn't do it. Well, you know what? I don't know if he did the 4 that he was executed for, but I know 3 that he did do, so we'll just call it poetic justice. And people say, well, the death penalty doesn't prevent crime. That guy won't do it again. I don't know if it'll influence his homies, but I can guarantee you, Tookie ain't gonna bother nobody else for quite a while. But that being said, now we have a situation where we have the highest recidivism rate in the country. We have crime going down because we're getting rid of drugs. That's why we've got to fight crystal meth, because it potentially becomes the new crack cocaine, and if we don't get in front of that, we'll have another spike in crime as people fight to see who's going to control that drug territory. We've got old people that we can let go. If you're blind and you got 1 leg, you know what? I'm not worried about you committing a crime. I'd be willing to bet anybody here that he ain't going to snatch your purse. If we've got people who are about to be released anyway, we need a network of services to make sure that they don't go back. When we send somebody to the state penitentiary for 3 to 6 months, and then we let them out because they're only there for a parole revocation of a simple offense, it would have been cheaper to send him to the Ritz-Carlton and Half Moon Bay. But we don't do that. We send him back to jail and we beat our chest and say we're protecting the public. A great philosopher from my community once said that if you always do what you always did, then you'll always get what you always got. That was Jackie Moms Mabley. And here we are looking and saying, we feel safe. Well, again, if you've been looking at the papers that I have, the current system ain't working either. There are people who are on parole who are committing crimes, so we're not really being saved with the system that we have. So clearly we're going to have to do something just a little bit different if we're going to make some change. I would agree that I might tweak this or tweak that. That's why we have a legislative process, and we'll be doing that over the time that some of us are here. I look at referendums. Again, I have a different view of referendums. The first African-American elected to the legislature was from Northern California. His name was Byron Rumford, and he had a Fair Housing Act. And you know what? They put a referendum on the ballot, and the people voted for it. Just because they voted for it didn't make it right. Because the people voted in California to say, we don't want black people to live in houses in public facilities. That was voted on in this state, and the Supreme Court had to come back and say, no, people, you're wrong. So I'm not as threatened, perhaps, as some of you are by the fact that there may be a referendum. At the end of the day, we're elected to do what we perceive to be the right thing to do. There are things in this that I think will reduce cost. There are some things that we may have to adjust. Should it be 2/3 or a majority vote? You know what? I'm open to that discussion. Should it be something that comes back for an automatic referral? You know what? I'm open to that as well. But I can tell you that if we don't do something, then what will be imposed on us by a court could be far worse, and then we'll all be saying, well, we didn't have any opportunity to have input into discussion. Yes, you do. I would say that we should look at guys who are 65 and let them out. I could reduce our average cost substantially because those guys cost a whole lot more to keep. We've got people in the joint. In fact, LA County is the largest insane asylum in the country. We're treating people for mental health in the joint. What sense does that make? There are a number of things that I think that we could do, and I think much of it's contained in this bill. That's why I would ask for an aye vote. And I would remind you of one thing again as people make the claim about public safety. In the last 3 recessions and the Great Depression of 1932, crime did not go up. Let me say that again. The fact that we are now in the middle of this depression, it doesn't scare me, because people's spirits are not bad. People commit crime because they have a series of motivations. But whether it was the Depression of 32, the Depression in the 70s, and the Depression in the 80s, crime did not go up. Crime goes up because there are other factors that drive that train. I would ask for an aye vote and suggest that going forward, we continue to work on the details to make this an even tighter bill. Thank you.